planet was discovered so many times that astronomers eventually stopped questioning whether it existed at all. By the late 1800s, some of the most respected observatories in Europe had quietly locked themselves inside a scientific crisis they could no longer admit publicly, because every calculation kept producing the same impossible result. Something near the sun was pulling Mercury out of position, and according to the most trusted mathematical system humanity had ever built, there was only one explanation. A hidden planet was orbiting closer to the sun than Mercury. Its name was Vulcan Hypothetical Planet, and for more than 50 years, scientists kept seeing it. The problem was that none of those sightings agreed with each other, and admitting that mistake meant something far worse. It meant Isaac Newton's laws had stopped working inside our own solar system. In 1859, French mathematician Urbain Le Verrier stood at the peak of scientific authority. Just 13 years earlier, he had done something extraordinary. Using only mathematics, he predicted the existence of Neptune before anyone had ever seen it. Astronomers pointed their telescopes exactly where his calculations said, and Neptune was there. It was one of the greatest predictive victories in scientific history. So when Mercury began behaving strangely, people listened. Mercury's orbit contained a tiny but devastating flaw. Each time it circled the sun, its closest approach shifted slightly. Not randomly, not occasionally. Every single orbit drifted forward by a tiny amount that Newton's equations could not fully explain. The discrepancy was only 43 arcseconds per century, a number so small most people would never notice it. But for astronomers, it was catastrophic. Because Newtonian mechanics had explained planetary motion perfectly for more than 200 years, and suddenly, one planet had stopped obeying. Le Verrier ran the numbers again and again. The answer refused to change. Something else had to be there. An unseen planet orbiting between Mercury and the sun, tugging Mercury slightly off course. The calculations were elegant, precise, and terrifyingly convincing. Then the search began. Observatories across Europe started staring directly at the sun. Astronomers waited for brief moments when a small black dot might cross the bright solar disk, and eventually, they started finding it. The first reports looked promising. Tiny circular shadows appeared moving across the sun. Observers quickly sketched what they saw. Dark dots drifting against a giant burning sphere. Each sighting became evidence. And with every new report, Vulcan felt more real. But that was not the part that made the situation dangerous. The dangerous part was what happened next. The orbital charts never matched. Each astronomer recorded a different transit path, different speeds, different timings, different orbital periods. Some observations suggested Vulcan orbited the sun every 19 days. Others claimed 28. Others implied completely different trajectories. The same object was supposedly appearing everywhere and nowhere consistently. Those telescope sketches began piling up. Dozens of 19th century drawings showing black dots crossing the sun. Each one looked credible. Each one contradicted the others. And somehow, nobody stopped the search. Because abandoning Vulcan meant something worse than admitting a false discovery. It meant one of science's strongest foundations had fractured. So astronomers kept finding what they needed to find. Years passed, then decades. And the evidence became stranger. Observers with strong reputations continued reporting sightings. Professional astronomers, experienced solar observers, entire institutions validating new observations. The sketches kept growing. The black dots kept appearing. But now, something subtle had changed. The observations were no longer independent discoveries. They had become acts of defense. The scientific community had become trapped inside its own expectation because Newton's equations were not supposed to fail. Not here, not inside our own planetary system. And that changed how people looked through telescopes. Every tiny imperfection crossing the sun became suspicious. Dust on lenses, small sunspots, optical distortions, momentary atmospheric interference. Anything unusual suddenly looked like Vulcan. The object itself had never changed. Only the meaning of the observation had changed. And that is where the real problem began. This was no longer about finding a planet. This was about protecting a belief system. Entire generations of observatories were unknowingly distorting evidence. Every contradictory sketch became less like observation and more like confirmation bias written onto paper. The same black dots crossing the sun kept returning. But now, those sketches meant something very different. They were not proving Vulcan existed. They were proving scientists had started trusting theory more than reality, and the consequences reached far beyond Mercury. Because if Newtonian mechanics had broken down here, near the sun, then every gravitational calculation in astronomy suddenly became suspect. Orbital predictions, planetary models, celestial mechanics itself. An entire scientific framework was hanging on one invisible planet. For over 50 years, Vulcan survived because the alternative was unbearable. Then in 1915, everything changed. A physicist named Albert Einstein introduced a radically different idea: general relativity. Einstein proposed that gravity was not a force pulling objects through space. Space itself could bend, and near massive objects like the sun, that bending changed the path planets followed. He recalculated Mercury's orbit, not approximately, exactly. The missing 43 arcseconds appeared instantly, perfectly. No hidden planet, no Vulcan, no mystery object near the sun. Mercury had never broken physics. Physics itself had been incomplete, and suddenly, every old telescope sketch changed meaning forever. Those dozens of black dots crossing the sun, those carefully drawn orbital charts, those decades of confident observation, they were never evidence of a hidden world. They were evidence of something far more disturbing. Entire generations of experts had unknowingly manufactured reality to protect an aging theory. The mathematics had not failed. The universe had not failed. Human certainty had failed. And for half a century, the most trusted scientific community on Earth kept discovering a planet that never existed. Not because the evidence was there, because admitting the truth was worse. Sometimes, the most dangerous illusion is not bad science. It is trusting yesterday's truth too long.